Good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning to wherever you're getting this show of. I want to apologize. Kind of came in, came out, had a little bit of technical issues on my end, but I managed to clear them up and be with you here today. So, as always, grateful that we get to be here, we get to be in this space, we get to create these spaces where we can exchange and exchange knowledge, but also learn and relate to each other in the struggle, and also inspire each other how we can push the struggle forward. And if you're new here, my name's Desire. I always do the tower at UNN on Sundays. So welcome to everyone on here today. Welcome to the tower at UNN. And today we're going to be talking about, as you can see, we're going to be talking about, first of all, we're going to be talking about elitism, and we're going to talk more in depth about why has Museveni built an elitist class around him, not only for his survival, but for the longevity of what he has built, and which is, of course, the leadership that he has installed in place, and why we even hear discussions about his son becoming president, and why it is that it's one class that is affiliated with politics, and how inaccessible the political arena has remained to the Ugandan masses. So welcome aboard. I want to welcome all of you who are here. So before I start, just a disclaimer that so usually I am produced by someone else, so I usually do have the anthems on hand, any state's anthem or even the national anthem itself. But in the case that I do not have it, I will go ahead regardless and acknowledge one of a state in Uganda. So I will take this time, of course, to acknowledge the contributions, not only culturally, but also in terms of economically, how Busoga State has contributed to Uganda, and not to Buganda, to Uganda. And so I will give a mention to the fact that these states that we do talk about were politically organized in their own nature. They inform our indigeneity, our identity, and most importantly, they tie us back to the land, which is a resource that is meant for the people to build for themselves and grow. So without staying too long on the matter, I'd like to start today's program. So firstly, today we're going to start with, I'm going to first introduce the topic. So as I said before, today we're going to be looking at, of course, elitism, and how has Museveni built an elite class around him for his survival, not only his survival, but for the longevity of course, his form of governance. So today, our main source, I will be covering the chapter of elitism, and this can be found in the book. It's the book titled Class Struggle in Africa by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. This is where we're going to be getting most of our information. So in order to start, we're going to go ahead and start with a video, so to set the pace for what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to go ahead, first of all, and share a video to inform what we're going to do, to just set the ground for what we're going to do today. So I want to go back to where this all began, the beginning of Museveni's government. So we will watch this video first, and then we will come back with another video.
On January 26, 1986, the NRA fought its way into Kampala and the military junta fled. A new leader was sworn in as president.
Nobody should think that what is happening today, or what has been happening in the last few days, is a mere change of guards. This is not a mere change of guards, I think this is a fundamental change in the politics of our country. Because in Africa we have seen so much change that change has become meaningless. It's no longer change but merely turmoil. This group getting rid of that group and that group doing worse than the group it got rid of. Now, please, I do not count us in that category of people. The National Resistance Movement, I think, is a clear-headed movement with clear objectives and with good membership. I think it makes a very big difference from the situation in which we were, where the very people in power were they themselves encouraging evil instead of trying to combat evil. I think this is a slightly different situation.
So as we can see from that video, of course, Museveni has already dug a hole for what would be his legacy, or what we know as his legacy today. So with that in the back of our minds, I would like us to watch the next video, which is going to be Museveni's campaign video into, of course, the elections that were recently had in 2021. And this was his campaign video of why he should attain presidency, which is after, of course, manipulating the constitution twice in order to even be able to run as a candidate and looking for a lifetime presidency. This is how he chose. So I want us to think about how Museveni came into power and the words he said, and the class and the people who he talked to and sought to appeal to, versus also in the end who the same class of people he's seeking to appeal to, and who every leader who goes into power has to appeal to the masses, which is the working people and the working masses. And I want us to take Museveni's governance as an example of how this works, and then learn of how then this system is built into a system of oppression and a system of repression and a system of segregation of sorts, not only economically, but also in terms of access to resources like education, healthcare, work opportunities, livelihood, and all things that affect our beings and further lead into exploitation. So let us look at his campaign, his campaign video that he had for securing your futures, and still take note of the people who he's speaking to, the group of people that he's speaking to in our community. And then we will get into today's topic.
80,000 Asians installed by the British in Uganda at the beginning of the century controlled 80% of the country's economy. In 1972, after a dream, General Amin declared the economic war.
Shortages of essential commodities started to bite. Sugar and soap became luxuries, prices skyrocketed, and the black market flourished. The subsequent governments struggled with different economic policies to revive the economy, but with little successes.
I think this is a fundamental change in the politics of our country.
In the late 80s, the NRM government fully adopted the free market approach and has led to considerable growth.
They first came and sold products here by importing them. Then they found there was a big market, and then that's how they said, no, it is better to make them here than to import. All of those have big markets here internally. But then there's also the regional market of East and Central Africa and Southern Africa. You have the market, you have increasingly low costs of doing business. We can export to the USA 6,500 products at zero tax.
As we can see from Museveni's video, he is still trying to appeal to the working masses, the working class of Ugandans, the Ugandans who wake up every day and put their bodies to actually participate in the economy, who lay down their bodies to participate in the economy, who are exploited because of their participation in the economy by the rich who set up the businesses and by the politicians who have made it easy for them to be exploited and who are in it for their own enrichment. So that brings me to today's topic. So today we're going to be talking about elitism. And I will, as usual, I'll be drawing from the work being studied, and I'll read from there. And then ahead, we're going to see more other videos to explain this further, so that we all leave this with an understanding. Because when elitism is playing part in our society, we have to acknowledge that we are living in a class society. And by acknowledging that we are living in a class society, there ought to be a consciousness of the classes, especially the class that is being sat on and suppressed by the minority class, which is, as they call themselves, the silent majority, but that is the minority class that is sitting on the majority class, that actually is the workers, the people who we see working in, the people who work everyday jobs in Uganda. And by this, I mean people working in the factories, people working in the markets, even people working in business, in these businesses, in hotels, people who are working in supermarkets, people who are working every day to uphold these big businesses that have been set up, that attribute, even the miners who work in these mining sites in the different states and gain nothing from those mine fields that are even on their own pieces of land. Those are the people that I'm referring to. I'm referring to people who their daily life is to work for a living, to exist on this earth. Conditioning that has been put onto us by the people who get into power, because it is the global structure of capitalism that has been implemented throughout after colonization that has allowed for this continuation, a continuation of capitalism, or the capitalistic economic system that separates us into these classes. So we'll go into the notes that are made by the author, some of the passages that I thought would inform our conversation today. So Dr. Kwame Nkrumah goes ahead to say in this chapter, in essence, elitists assert that in practice, the minority always exercises effective power, and that the dominant minority can never be controlled by the majority. I think this begins to paint a picture of Ugandan parliament versus the people. They are the minority, they assert all power and dominance, but the majority, which is the Ugandan people who vote and elect them and put them in those positions of power, are then stripped of all their power. No matter what so-called democratic institutions are employed, we all know we go to elections, elections are held, but still this minority has this power and strength over a majority, which is the nation itself, and also can be an excuse for non-performativity. The author goes on to say, the cohesiveness of elites constitutes their main strength. They always work together. This is something we ought to know. They are small in relation to the nation as a whole, but they are strong out of proportion of their size. Bourgeoisie theorists seeking to justify the continuance of capitalism have found it necessary to fall back on elitism. They cannot, by any rational argument, justify the harsh irrationality of capitalism. An example I can give of this, the irrationality of capitalism, is a situation whereby traders in different malls in Kampala were actually protesting because they were being charged whilst a lockdown was still in place, but they still had to pay rent. And in order for their cries were not heard. So imagine you have a shop in a mall in Kampala, which is even a highly priced place to have a shop in. And then your landlord is asking you to pay, knowing very well that the government has put in place not only a lockdown, but also a curfew, which does not enable you to work to generate enough revenue. And then you question yourself where they think you're going to get the money from. But when you protest because of this behavior and irrationality that is being brought down to you because of capitalism, because all your renter cares about is the profit, you are then faced with state violence. It is the state itself that is protecting these people. It is the police coming to beat you up. It is the police coming to lock you up. which belongs to the state, which means it belongs to you, because you are the state, but you have no say and are stripped of all power. And the state only protects those who own these businesses that manufacture this profit. So that's the thing. They cannot even defend the irrationality of this capitalism because it always presents contradictions like this. So they try to show that there will always be a ruling elite. This is why they have gone to show us that there will always be a ruling elite. The government and parliament will always be governed by a certain class of, and that government is always in the hands of those most fitted to govern. Even the idea that there exists a character who is most fitted to govern a people itself is an illusion and doesn't exist. But the way how we have been trained and programmed with all the propaganda, especially in Uganda's sake, it's either the people who fought and won the war or the elites who have studied and can fill these roles. Then the author goes on to say, in maintaining this, they evade the reality of the economic class structure and class struggle in a capitalistic society. So this is something we ought to look out for in our leaders. And this is something, if in all honesty speaking, so we're gonna watch another video soon ahead, is we look for leaders who are going to acknowledge how fractured the society has been into a classist capitalistic society, but not only leaders who are promising to change on it, but actually have strategies and plans of combating it. Not only the leaders, but a system that will provide for that. Because it's not only the leader who can promise you that they are going to change an economic situation in a country. Because Museveni, as I said, let's keep those two videos in mind because they're very important. Museveni came into power promising to fundamental change, especially that would change the livelihood of people economically, welfare-wise. And Museveni is still promising the same things he promised in 1986. In 2019, securing your future still has the same taunt. It's still the recycled same lies that he comes into power to change the livelihood and the beings of people by having welfare. What is it called? What did Museveni call them? He called them, if anyone knows it, to put it in the comment section, he called them wealth creation tours, because he actually had wealth creation tours. And it's still the same rhetoric and jargon that is being used and promised to the masses, not only by Museveni, but by opposition, that actually their well-being is going to be changed through this democratic process. But in the backdrop of all this is a class of people who seek to make sure that those class societies remain, because then they get to hold on to power. That's how it works. It cannot work when the majority have power. That means the minority will not have power. So unless they suggest a system that is actually going to revolutionize that system that creates such disposition for the majority, they are not telling you anything different from what you're experiencing now. So going on to the next part, the author continues to say, among basic tenets of elitism is the theory that power breeds power. And we know this is true. Museveni wants to put his son on power. It's that belief that power breeds power. And that apathy, submissiveness, and difference are qualities of the masses in politics. And this is true too, because Museveni expects the Ugandan people to be submissive, to be apathetic, to have indifference, and he expects us, the Ugandan people, to allow this, to accept this. This is not done in the dark of us. This is done disrespectfully towards us, and we're expected to just sit there and take it. Democracy has been defined as competition between oligarchs. And this is also true in Uganda's sake. We talk about how, we all the time talk about how participating in even parliamentary elections is not something an everyday Ugandan can wake up and just do. You have to have a sponsor, you have to have resources. So it is not even a competition that the majority or the masses can participate in, but it is a competition that is reserved for a certain class of people in our society. So the author goes on to say, pluralists assert that power is not held by a single elite, but by a mixture of many. And this is also very true. We ought to remember that Museveni might be the face, but Museveni represents a class of many. Power is regarded as cumulative, wealth, social status, power, political power, being interwoven. And this is also true. If you see anything that is not true in Uganda's situation, please do let me know. How is power woven in Uganda? Via strength, social status, and political power. You cannot participate if you do not have those three things. So connected with this view is the idea of elite consciousness. It's the idea that they have that consciousness of the masses. That is the involvement in policy formation. Only they can make policies that affect the everyday people by going to marketplaces, dining and eating with everyday people. Apparently, they are working to some realizations of some political policies they can put in place. And then of only the most important elite groupings. The author goes on to say, they went even further and asserted that participation in government was not a necessary feature of democracy and not in itself an important ideal. So we have seen the elites who actually might not even be in parliament or might not even participate might not participate in the democracy. How many people does Museveni just appoint who are part of his elitist club? How many people does he wake up and just appoint into power who have served him for a while? I don't remember the last time Eli Tumwine was ever voted for by a Ugandan. If anyone remembers the last time you actually went to a ballot box and you voted for Eli Tumwine, please let me know. We need to understand as a people, we need to understand as a people going against the system, we're not only going against individual politicians, but we're going against a class system that has been reinstalled to systematically, and it's not only for Uganda's sake, this is a global reality that is being faced by the working class. And there is need for the working class to actually organize themselves, to reorganize themselves, to actually have better conditions in their own contexts. And for us, that comes in the context of Uganda. The development of Uganda ought to serve us. The system ought not to be profit-making, but for use for Ugandans. The welfare system needs to meet our needs. Development has to be structured around us. But the reverse is happening, where it's structured to fulfill the needs of a single small class, who are the ruling class, who have classified themselves as the elites, who govern whatever happens in politics. They handle all the contracts that have to do with development projects in Uganda. They pass these amongst each other, and any Ugandan that tries to make even an endeavor or contribute to a certain industry, it is killed before it even begins. An example that I'll give, we talk about Acholi State, and let's talk about, before I never knew that anything could grow in Acholi, and I'm just being honest, and that was total ignorance. But then when you go and actually read about what the history in Acholi, I start to realize, because it was pure ignorance of thinking that everything that happened north of Uganda had nothing to do with farming, but a lot to do with cattle rearing. But when you do your research, you start to realize that Acholi is actually one of the areas where some of these food crops are grown, such as millet, sorghum. And it's a place whereby war was placed there, destabilizing this system, the agricultural system that not only used to serve the people or the working masses and was a way for the people to utilize the land, but because of the war that was put there by Museveni and his government, it also resulted in the stealing of these fertile lands or arable lands of the Acholi people, and then putting it back into the same hands of the elitist classes, where Salim Saleh has a lot of land in Acholi State. So it is this realization that this is only serving a particular class. And us, we need to recognize the class that we stand in, because we can only come together as that to transformatively change the system at hand, because it is a system put in place to not change just because we change the leader. It can only change because we change the system of governance. So we will go ahead. So as we see already from this, even the democratic process does not matter as long as this elite class is together and holding power together. So you going to elections is not going to change a single way of how they function or move around in terms of the policies that are put in place to govern you, because they are cohesively together, because they have to make profit at the end of the day. So you're wasting your energy when you go to the ballot box, and what is sold during campaigns is just lies, basically, because Museveni has been saying the same thing since 1986, that he will fundamentally change the livelihood of Ugandans. And he's still saying it in 2019 when he made this video, only for him to actually draw back to what Idi Amin Dada, who is the dictator, did for Ugandan working class masses when he reckoned what the British had done by bringing the Indian coolies into Uganda and creating a class system that was actually based on a racism of them being at the top and the Indian coolies being placed next, and then the Ugandan Africans were placed below that and had no access to these resources. It was Idi Amin that then decided that no, the Indian people need to be repatriated back to India in order for Ugandans to have access to these businesses. And it's a tentative subject that has been discussed differently in different times, but it depends who is discussing it and to what benefit. But Museveni can use it as an example in his video, a person who has done nothing for the Ugandan people. But when we talk about it as Ugandans, to draw back to a time whereby the working classes seem to be getting access to actually their means of production, then you're talking about you're glorifying Idi Amin Dada, the dictator, and you ought not to talk about it. So these are all things for us to think about. What is really being presented to us, and what are the gaps that we need to fill ourselves? So the author continues to say, there can be no class within a class, but there are elites within a class. Elites arise from the development and the formation of a class. As you can see from this picture, you start to see how society is set up, with profit being the main part, the rulers taking the rule, the people who do all the fallacy and the propaganda being in the middle. The army and military is always used to push down the masses and repress them. And then you have the ones who dine and eat on the blood and the tears of the masses. And then you just have the people who actually work to feed everyone within that system and work to actually get profit for everyone in that system, which is majority of the people. So, as I was saying before, we ought to think about, what class do you find yourself in? Start to identify with that and then start to work towards a class consciousness. But as we do this, let's keep in mind that one single leader getting into power in the same system that Uganda has today is going to provide no difference. As I've said before, this is that it doesn't matter for them. The democratic process doesn't matter and doesn't change the matter of fact that it is still them in governance. So in order to continue, we're gonna first go ahead and watch another video, because I think this video will set pace for everything that I've said thus far. And then after that, we're going to watch two videos back to back. So I'm going to start with one just to show the context, so that people just don't think I'm waffling. These are things I'm not just out here speaking of because I'm discontent, but these are things that have been happening as far back as 2014. And I want you to see the togetherness that the elites have amongst each other, regardless of how they get into office. This is a video of members of the parliament of Uganda back in 2014. All agreeing that they needed a pay in raise. for doing nothing, even back then. Even now, they will all gladly receive the money that is given to them to buy cars. And they will do petty things such as they will do other petty things such as open up an ambulance. But how about write a policy for healthcare? How about write a policy beckoning for the building of health institutions, or even just the basic improvement of Mulago's facilities, other than Mulago being shown on TV every day for its inadequacy? But let's watch this video of back in 2014 of politicians asking for a rise in pay, and they all agreed. Like, I want us to know that they will agree with each other. They are together in this, and you are on your own.
NTV has obtained a copy of the report, which shows that Parliament intends to spend 332 billion shillings this financial year. But as lawmakers wait to debate their budget, NTV has reliably learned that some MPs are planning to move a motion recommending an increment in the salaries and emoluments of MPs. Although the proposed salary increment is not in the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee report, sources in Parliament told NTV that a group of MPs plan to raise the matter on the floor during the debate on the budget of the Parliamentary Commission. Not surprisingly, all the MPs who engaged supported the proposal to enhance their salaries and emoluments.
If they are to review, I would support it. I would also support it, so that you are cushioned against some of those shocks that members of Parliament get.
I would rather that we have that done for MPs, but coming together with a law akin to what is in Kenya, where members of Parliament are prohibited by law from making unnecessary expenditures and donations.
The salary you're giving a member of Parliament right now is low. Parliament determines its own salaries or emoluments for its members. Is a constitutional matter. It's a constitutional mandate.
The MP's salaries are computed using a complex formula which puts the basic salary at 2.5 million shillings. But with allowances, MPs' pay ranges between 20 and 25 million shillings, depending on how far their constituency is from Kampala.
But for now, the public should not blame MPs. They should not condemn Parliament. They should think and look at the situation in which members of Parliament work, the difficulties they face.
The proposal to raise MPs' salaries is premised on the fact that Parliament and the Executive have agreed to set up a salary review commission to look into the salaries of all civil servants so as to harmonize them.
There was what was called Constituency Development Fund. If that could be revived and improved, like the one of Kenya.
A few days ago, Speaker of Parliament Rebecca Kadaga admitted that many MPs are heavily indebted.
There are members who find difficulties walking outside the presence of Parliament because the bailiffs are waiting, they are moving around the gate.
If you are paid to go to Mbarara and you go to Mbarara and you come back, that's not an earning. You have not earned. You have been facilitated to do your work. So I would be a beneficiary of an increase in the salary.
So that's what the public should understand, that we earn 1.5 million after tax. It is emoluments is to enable us perform our duties.
MPs will continue being broke. The public will continue perceiving them as over-earning, yet not.
President Museveni has foiled MPs' previous attempts to increase their salaries. He advised that salaries of teachers, medical workers, police officers and soldiers who are poorly paid will have to be considered first before the MPs. Jingo Francis, NTV Weekend Edition.
You know what? That comes as not a surprise. But from everything that I'm saying today, if we all can pick up this message of the next video that I'm about to play, then we will be okay as a people. Because we need to start recognizing the role that we play in all this. Because MPs can do what they want to do. Flag bearers can go ahead and do what they want to do. But when we understand the change that we want to see systemically, and we attack the system from its roots and be radical about it, which is to attack the problem at its roots and understand the problem we are fighting, which is a neo-colonial system, but a neo-colonial capitalistic system that has been tied onto not only us as Uganda, but on the African continent to loot the resources but also to loot the resources and control our minds. Once we let go of that and focus in on a systematic change and adopt this to our revolution, we can be okay. So I hope that this next video I play rings true to everyone and everyone takes something from it. Because this is a video I rewatch back and think about a lot and look at our political situation and all our political actors. And I realize that the job that we have to do as the masses is the biggest job. And it is our task to fulfill our destiny, because these politicians will lead us nowhere. So I hope everyone gets something from this video and you share it, because Kwame Ture, I'm going to play a Kwame Ture video next. This is someone I go back to and watch all the time. This is someone I've learned from just watching him online, and appreciated the art of organizing ourselves as a masses to get what we deserve and not to get the scrums that we're given, because we ought not to be disrespected like this by people who we actually put into power. So I'll go ahead and play that video and then we can continue from there.
Our struggle since the 60s, you will see nothing but betrayals by the petty bourgeois elements in our society. The African bourgeoisie is the most corrupt bourgeoisie in the world. In Africa, they seek luxury in the midst of mass suffering. There are more Mercedes in Africa than in any other continent in the world. In America, as soon as they arrive at a position based on this blood of the people, they snatch that position and run away from the people. But you must not think that they represent the people. They only represent their opportunistic self, using the people every step of the way. So you must not be confused. It must be clear then, for the 60s, the class struggle in the African Revolution must be more ruthless and uncompromising than in any other revolution. Here then the masses must come without pity and without mercy to trample upon these reactionary pigs who, after the people have gained struggle through their blood, come to hand back the gains on a silver platter to the very enemy the people fought. This will come as a natural consequence. The people themselves are everywhere screaming that it's time for them to deal with these reactionary pigs. Even in America, they say, our leaders must be held accountable. They're only saying here that these people must be accountable to those who made it possible for them to get there. Thus, not only is the revolution inevitable, but it is clarifying itself and it is qualifying itself. For the African masses everywhere, the clairpoised position now for class struggle has become inevitable and irreversible. The petty bourgeoisie everywhere will be running for cover, but the masses will spare them not. Consequently, we who have dedicated our lives to the people's struggle, we who, knowing that the people will always be free, we, understanding that we must make a contribution to qualify our struggle since the 60s, have been dedicating all our energies to only one task: the organization of the masses of our people. The organization of the masses of our people. We are not running for mayor, we're not running for president. No changes can come from the top down. We're not stupid. Changes can only come from the bottom up. The masses and the masses alone can make them. If you want to learn something from the 60s, the lesson is simple: organize the masses of the people. Thank you.
Welcome back, and that's why we do what we do here. Because we have a recognition and a reconciliation with our position as part of the masses. It is only us in the masses that can, when we organize ourselves, when we get to one, I've forgotten the word in English, but when we have that cause for ourselves, when we have that yearning for ourselves, when we have that direction that is manifested from ourselves, but when it is informed with a way and with solutions, we have the ability to actually change the situation that is put onto us by a small elite class. We wield the power to change that reality so that the reality plays in a better place for us. So change, what he said there, what I always take out, We are not stupid to think that change will come from the top up. And that's something that we have believed in as Ugandans for the longest time. And what has it brought? It has only brought genocide. It has only brought further impoverishment of Ugandans. It has brought and the impoverishment of Ugandans has characterized itself in so many different ways, with so many Ugandans having to flee home and go to all these different places and countries and relocate there to earn a living, fleeing their lands, fleeing their connection to the lands and their ancestry, losing their lands because they just don't flee their lands. Most of these lands are sold into the same hands of the elitist class. It has caused the miseducation, the misleadership of Ugandans, the disinformation that Ugandans are fed. It has caused what they call a confusion. But if you break down the word confusion, it's only a mixture of the word con and fusion. It is conship that is fused and put down in the masses as propaganda, and on a systematic level is placed into the society to destabilize it so that you never rise up, you never have a class consciousness, you never realize that you are part of the working class, you are part of what is called the libertarians. You are part of this class that is ignored, dismissed by the ruling class. You as a class can organize and get together and overthrow the system that is opposed on you for your disposition. This is why this all is done, so that they can enjoy the profits, the benefits, the looting, the extortion that happens within this system. And they can continue to, of course, serve their masters. Because we have to also understand that the bigger question is, of course, these Western countries that support such governance, that equip them with weaponry, that train some of our soldiers, to make sure that they have the tactics to come and suppress us whenever the masses rise. Because never once, we all know, all the way from the walk to work protests, all those were working class people. All those were people who wake up and go to their businesses in Kampala, in Echkuwo, these were working class people. And those were protests that were not only marching for the change of the face of the government, but hoped if the leader changed, their needs would be addressed. That in itself was a class consciousness, but one that was never even given the space to be talked about like that. One that was only given the channel. This is what happens with Ugandan politics. What we have a very classist society. But then what happens is politicians do recognize that. And this is not something that has been discovered just recently. This is something that has been used over time. That's why when Museveni came into power, he clearly said, we'll work towards the welfare of the people, because that's the gap that needs to be filled for the African people. Because the class system is not just Uganda, it's not just Uganda, it's a whole global issue. And Africans are really put at the back end of it, because it's classist racism. The racism towards Africans elevates itself into the creation of classes, whereby Africans, we have the bottom class, but we produce the most. All the resources that are needed for the development of these developed nations actually has come from us. Not only through the enslavement of our African people, but also through colonization. And also it continues now with the stupid puppets we have in power in the neo-colonial era. So if we start to recognize this, that we are not only suppressed as Africans, but also as a class of workers in the global structure, but also locally in our structures, and start to overthrow those governments and forms of leadership by introducing transformative leaderships that will structure themselves differently to actually better address the needs of the people, only then can we free ourselves. But just changing the face of leadership, especially if the face of leadership is not directly at the conditions of the working people, but is paraphrased to seem like it is part of that movement, it will not resolve the initial problem. These problems will carry forward. So if we could continue with the presentation, I'll go on to the other notes that the author does, some of the passages that are picked out. So European-style elites may be discerned among the African bourgeoisie, Under colonialism, the African elites were chiefs in the colonial legislative councils and in the colonial administrative services. Lawyers and doctors, judges and magistrates, top civil servants, senior army and police officers. After independence, the old elites remained virtually intact and acquired greater strength. The position of members of parliament and national assemblies, cabinet ministers, top civil servants, senior army and police officers, and so on were enhanced. They were no longer subordinate to colonial authority. Members of the professions, for example, teachers, lawyers, and doctors, benefited by the Africanization policies of the newly independent government. It was in the post-independence period that there emerged what may be termed as the party nuaux riches, an elite which developed from among the ranks of the party, which successfully won political freedom from the colonial power. Doesn't this remind us of some figures in our own politics? We look at figures such as Museveni. This is a figure that actually rose to this political power and attainment after overthrowing Obote, or by then it was Tito Okello's regime. And we think of people such as Paul Kagame as well. By the way, I'll show this video before I talk about him, and then we'll see, because once we start to actually look at the class politics, we can begin to know who's actually on our side. You know, we can see from their accumulation of wealth and be able to know who they partner up with and if they're on our side or not. Because if you're for the masses, you will redistribute your wealth. I'm not saying that all rich people are against, but there is people who redistribute their wealth. But the ones who accumulate and hold on to it and create opportunities of accumulation by our major oppressor in the West, they are not on your side. And politicians have used this as an opportunity, have used politics as an opportunity to rise their class and get into this elite class. Even through coup d'etats, we can talk about Museveni, we can talk about Kagame. People who had nothing, we talk about it all the time. But now when you look at the wealth and the mansions that they live in, it's ridiculous. So we'll watch this first.
Come this side, take from this side to there, so we'll see the cows.
Day 3 of the presidential visit here in Rwanda, here at the presidential ranch in Muhazi, Ramagana district, where His Excellency, the President, is being taken around on a very small and short tour of the President's ranch here in Muhazi. They've been looking at what, for both of them, is their passion, cows, and a little discussion here and there about the type of cows, the amount of milk they produce, and obviously the quality and size of the farm, the beautiful scenery here at the farm, because the farm is just adjacent to Lake Muhazi, of course, which is also part of His Excellency, the President's residence here in Muhazi, Ramagana district.
You know, when you look at the tail, the anus, if it is pointed, that's not a good bull, but this one is very good. Very good, very good. That 8 liters is one milking.
Yeah, of course.
In the morning only. So if they add the evening, 16 plus what the calf takes. Yeah. So they can go up to 20.
This one.
Very good. Very good.
A very rare opportunity here to be at the presidential ranch and exclusive to NTV, a moment with the presidents as they did one of their most favorite passions, grazing cows and taking a look at cows. An opportunity a short while ago where the president was offered by his host, President Paul Kagame, 10 beautiful cows, and His Excellency obviously very grateful for that offer on this day 3 of his presidential visit, official state visit to Rwanda, that will later this evening be commemorated with a banquet, a dinner hosted in his honor at the Kigali Serena Hotel.
So what you're seeing, if this is not normal to you, but this is the elitist lifestyle. You own massive pieces of land that belong to the people. You own massive property that also belongs to the people. You accumulate it all for yourself. Because honestly, if we're going to talk about presidents in our countries being able to live comfortably, this is a bit of an exaggeration. It's not even a bit of an exaggeration. This is an exaggeration. He almost has an island to himself. For a farm, for him to live and his family. But what is happening to the people? And are people still impoverished? Museveni is even building houses for his second wife. Who knows if he's built one for a third and a fourth and a fifth? Everyone participating in politics seems to have mansions. But what about the Ugandan people? Why we have to make this connection of the class that politicians have placed themselves in or are already in order to participate, and start to think about where we fit in all of this. Because once we start to realize that, then we can organize ourselves to overthrow the sham of the system that we have in place. Because in Uganda's sake, I will continue to say this, and I will continuously say this. Changing the face of whoever ought to govern Uganda will not change Uganda. Uganda actually needs systematic change, which will go to the root causes of the problems that Uganda faces, which is wealth disparity, inaccessibility to resources, the silencing of nations that exist within Buganda, and the lack of self-determination for those nations still remains important, because it provides for a total decolonization of Uganda as a system structure, but also that a system that will talk about African Federacy in a way that benefits Uganda, and not talk about East African Federacy like it's not Ugandan soldiers going and killing Congolese people. And that doesn't need to be addressed for the service of the Western states in order to loot Congolese minerals. So we need to be very vigilant when we think about how we want to participate in politics this time around, what role we want to play, and for what benefit we want it to be. And that can only come through organizing ourselves and actually having a cause. Not a cause, I've forgotten the word in English, but in Luganda, the correct word is omulamoga turiko, is very important. I will continue to finish some of these the rest of this, the pointers that the author talked about. So the author continues to say, they exploit their new positions of power and indulge in nepotism. And this is not new. Like, we can look around Uganda, like the first lady has been, first of all, was the Minister of Girl Child Education. Next, not Girl Child Education, it was Girl Child something in Karamoja. And then next, she is the Minister of Education. What qualifications does Janet Museveni have in order to serve this position? That's the nepotism they're talking about. All of Museveni's daughters participating in healthcare. What is that about? Even just Muhoozi becoming the next president of Uganda, like as though this is an empire that they can just roam around. This again talks to that that point. The nepotism that they can indulge in, the corruption, this is not even a question because that happens in Uganda day in, day out. Thereby, where did all the COVID aid money go? That is still a question they have not yet answered. Leave alone the COVID money. How about all the money invested into these industries? Where did that go? How about the money that we owed to pay China back that ended up in us losing a whole airport? Let's not forget this economic debt we're in. And by the way, that reminds me that Congo had sued us, not sued us, but taken us to court for the war crimes. And it was this week that they actually agreed on an amount. And I think the amount, I'll have to double check, the amount that was agreed on is about 316 million that we ought to pay them. But what had been put in play, what they were asking for was in the billions, but they reached an amount which is about 300 something million that we owe to Congo because of the war we put in Congo. Where is all that money going to come from? After they told us last year that we all have to pay 1.5 million in order to cover Uganda's debt, but we haven't even caused that debt. It's this class that is ruling that has caused this debt just by having mere elections and being the political leaders and fueled it into their businesses and their enrichment. Look no further for such money. And then it continues to say, thereby discrediting the party and helping to pave way for reactionary coup d'etats. And this is exactly what Museveni did. He had a reactionary coup d'etat. He woke up with 27 people. He only had one vote and decided to start a coup d'etat. But he didn't decide to start a coup d'etat. He knew people had started a coup d'etat against the government with legitimate claims, and he bandwagoned. And then when he was losing and was abroad, had to be called back so that he could ride the high horse into power. If you know your history and if you've listened to your history, it was reactionary. He was not bringing any fundamental change to Uganda. He was reacting to the political system in Uganda, because then he would play a major role for Western powers by being the puppet that he is today. The same thing goes for Kagame, whereby he served in Uganda's government, patiently waited, waged war in the Congo, went back to Rwanda, and plays the same role. And they both torture the Congo. These are reactionary leaders who have led reactionary coup d'etats to get themselves in position of power. The author goes on to say, the African businessman is in general not so much interested in developing industry as in seeking to enrich himself by speculation, black marketeering, corruption, and the receipt of commissions from contracts. And we see this happening all over Uganda today in terms of the business. Like, if you even think of the IRS money, and by various financial manipulations connected with the receipt of so-called aid. This aid, where does it all go? The African capitalist thus becomes the class ally of the bourgeoisie of the capitalist world. And the capitalist world is, of course, the Western world. It's the one that set this system in place. He is a pawn in the immense network of international monopoly finance capital. And if you've been watching my shows, there's a show that I came on here and talked about the merchants and mercantilism and the monopolies that have been created that were created and facilitated not only the enslavement of our people, but also facilitated the colonization of our people, which ended up being monopolies. For example, there are so many companies that still exist today. If we think about Unilever played a big role into the colonization of Nigeria and for Nigeria's oil. They weren't colonizing Nigeria just because they wanted to go and colonize. It was a business agreement. And the father grasp on Nigeria by putting in puppet leaders is still for that business agreement. We talked about all the different oil that existed. And there was another company we talked about in terms of Uganda, Shell. When you look at Shell, the Dutch Shell industry, they were also looking at the oil that was the Albertine oil. It had nothing to do with all these things we get told that explorers came and saw Africa was so beautiful and they decided to go back and inform, and then the colonizers came and colonized. It was a business issue for them. They wanted to expand their businesses, and they did. And when they did, then they started making them into monopolies so that they would hold all the power, which monopolies guaranteed that only money mattered. That's why we live in a system where only money matters. And we ought to attack that system at its head. And that comes with changing the way how we are governed, because it is the template on which we are governed that facilitates such nonsense. As I finish for the last bit, the author goes on to say, the middle class in developing countries was in the main created by the educational and administrative systems introduced under colonialism. The predominance of the intelligentsia in the middle class is due in the main to the deliberate policy of the colonial power in fostering the growth of an intelligentsia geared to Western ideologies, which it needed for successful functioning of the colonial administration. At the same time, the colonial power curbed opportunities for the formation of an indigenous business class. And we could tell that this is true. All these people still get support, training, and backing from the same Western world. And this only did not happen post-independence, but also happened during colonization, that Mobutu was able to actually orchestrate the killing of Patrice Lumumba, because Mobutu has been part of that administrative, that elitist class or that middle class that has been created due to colonization. That's why in Burkina Faso with Thomas Sankara, you have what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Sorry, today I'm blanking out on names. What's his name? Sorry, I've forgotten his name. But the companion who actually fought with Thomas Sankara towards the liberation of Burkina Faso, then becomes friends and cuddles up to Western powers, who then help him take on a coup d'etat against Thomas Sankara's government, and later on his assassination as well. We can look at Dr. Kwame Nkrumah himself, whereby the CIA plays a major role in infiltrating and orchestrating a coup d'etat to draw him out of Ghana. We cannot start to dismiss that we are not only fighting the enemy within, but we have an outside enemy too. But the only way that we can get rid of both enemies is by handling the enemy within. So it continues to say, elite associations such as bar associations, medical societies, Old Fellows, Freemason, Rotary clubs emerge with the development of elites. These associations assist class formation by institutionalizing social differences. The existence of class feeling is shown in the desire to join associations and clubs which are thought to enhance social status. And the irony is that in Uganda's case, the major association to join, if you want to enhance your social status, I know I'm laughing when I say this, is because it is so worrying. This is the parliament. The parliament has become the main association. Oh, sorry, I was not sharing this screen while reading this. My apologies. Uganda's parliament has become the most desirable association or club to join as a member if you want to enrich or enhance your social status. It provides for the income, for the accommodation of the luxurious lifestyle. It provides for its acceptance, for its continuity, because we have to know there's people who remain in parliament so that this continues. So we ought to have a class consciousness, and we ought to address this revolution with Omulama, with a strategy. That's the word in English, with a strategy. And here, of course, the strategy we keep on beckoning is Uganda needs transformative change from unitary governance to go into a federacy, and a federacy based off of our indigeneity and the return of the land and the means of production to the hands of the people where it belongs, to its indigenous communities, and allow for a federation of government that will unite all Ugandans in but also will redistribute back the means of production to Ugandans to further enhance our way of living as a nation. And we ought to also rise up not only in recognition of that as a political change that can come our way, but also as an economic change that ought to come our way. Because we have to differentiate between federacy being given to us that we get Buganda State, Bunyoro State, Busoga State. We need the means of production, which is the land and everything that comes from the land and is of the land, and our ability to work on the land and produce from the land gets given back to its people. The economy to be controlled by that division of power, and not just a central government controlling all the money and resources and giving us empty shells of states. We need to know it, understand it, start to live it, and also rise up as a group and organize ourselves to be ready to take it on. Because this is the only way that we can see the change that we yearn for. Because there is no other way that we're going to even get that change that we seek to get through just changing. As Museveni said from his mouth, this is not a mere change of guards. It was a mere change of guards. If we want another mere change of guards, we must ignore then the needs of the masses, which is to address the class situation happening. So in order for that not to happen, we need to systematically change Uganda. So that is what I had for you today. If there is any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the comment box. I'll try my very best to read and address them. But if there is no questions, in the background, I'm gonna go ahead and still replay that video from one of our ancestors, Kwame Ture, because that message needs to sink in. We need to go back to it, and we need to organize ourselves towards the change that we need, that we ought to. But we have to understand also how the enemy is moving, so that we can always point the enemy within, because it's the enemy within that confuses us Africans. I've forgotten the lady's name, but she was talking and she was like, she said, when colonization happened, and this is also something that has been addressed by a couple of African scholars, when colonization happened, we all knew the aim was for the last shall become the first. And we knew that the first were by then the colonizers, who were Europeans. Therefore, the African ought to become the first in their land and take it back. But when the power was given to our fellow Africans and they started acting like the colonizer, we were very confused. Until this day, we remain confused by this fact that there is actually people within us that serve the European master. And we need to take care of that. And the only way we can do that is by raising our class consciousness. So I'm going to go ahead and play that video again. If you have any questions, please do put them in the comment section, and I'll get back to them after this video. But it's always nice to come on here and have these discussions and put this information out there, and so that we know what we want. We organize ourselves for what we want, because as he said in that video, change is not going to come from the top up. Change is going to come from bottom up. And it's us that need to be organized in order to face this adversity that has been put on our path to actually fully liberating ourselves. So I'll play the video one more time, and then if there are no further questions, I will go ahead and close today's show.
With our struggle since the 60s, you will see nothing but betrayals by the petty bourgeois elements in our society. The African bourgeoisie is the most corrupt bourgeoisie in the world. In Africa, they seek luxury in the midst of mass suffering. There are more Mercedes in Africa than in any other continent in the world. In America, as soon as they arrive at a position based on this blood of the people, they snatch that position and run away from the people. But you must not think that they represent the people. They only represent their opportunistic self, using the people every step of the way. So you must not be confused. It must be clear then, for the 60s, the class struggle in the African Revolution must be more ruthless and uncompromising than in any other revolution. Here then the masses must come without pity and without mercy to trample upon these reactionary pigs who, after the people have gained struggle through their blood, come to hand back the gains on a silver platter to the very enemy the people fought. This will come as a natural consequence. The people themselves are everywhere screaming that it's time for them to deal with these reactionary pigs. Even in America, they say, our leaders must be held accountable. They're only saying here that these people must be accountable to those who made it possible for them to get there. Thus, not only is the revolution inevitable, but it is clarifying itself and it is qualifying itself. For the African masses everywhere, the clairpoise position now for class struggle has become inevitable and irreversible. The petty bourgeoisie everywhere will be running for cover, but the masses will spare them not. Consequently, we who have dedicated our lives to the people's struggle, we who, knowing that the people will always be free, we, understanding that we must make a contribution to qualify our struggle since the 60s, have been dedicating all our energies to only one task: the organization of the masses of our people. The organization of the masses of our people. We are not running for mayor, we're not running for president. No changes can come from the top down. We're not stupid. Changes can only come from the bottom up. The masses and the masses alone can make them. If you want to learn something from the 60s, the lesson is simple: organize the masses of the people. Thank you.
So I want to close off this show with some of the last words that he does say. Our revolution has already quantified itself and qualified itself because of the situation we have been put in by the political masqueraders. Already our revolution is when we talk about the issues that we face, we cannot fail to mention impoverishment. We cannot fail to mention inaccessibility to healthcare. We cannot fail to mention inaccessibility to education. We cannot fail to mention human rights abuses. It has already qualified and quantified itself in a way whereby it is the classes of the workers that is being exploited, attacked, and suppressed. So the qualification and the quantification of this has happened, where we are also the majority when we talk about quantity. And that is why any politician on the rise always comes down to the masses to convince the masses to back them up so that they have political relevance. But also, because it has qualified itself, it is the masses that will bring about the change that we want to see. And our job on here, I will say in Uganda and I'll say it in English: if you have learned something, or when you know something, your job as an organizer or as a people who we are organizing ourselves amongst the masses, as he said, we're not looking to be mayors, we're not looking to be presidents. We're looking for the change that we want to see. It is our job, it is on our shoulders to teach the next person, and then teach the next person, and make sure that this message is not only kept to ourselves, but it is kept within our class, which is our mass struggle. The people who are facing the same issues as ourselves, or even the people who feel for the issues of the masses. Because as I said before, not every rich person, to a certain extent, although majority within this capitalistic system, will end up serving the masters and the needs and the contradictions of capitalism. Some actually look to the redistribution of their wealth. So there is people who do feel for the masses, which is rare, I would like to reinstate again. And in Uganda's case, politics has only created an avenue for these people to start out their business plans. Let us not act like the participation in politics in Uganda is now a source of revenue and income. People even count their payment before they win their election. Meaning people will go and get loans to participate in the campaign Because they know once they get to parliament, they're going to get paid enough to pay it off. What about that doesn't tell you it is all about the money? Because how are you going to serve me if your main focus is to pay your credit? Where am I on that priority list? So we ought to organize ourselves. We ought to teach ourselves. If you've understood it, it is your job to spread it further. No one else is going to do this job for us. And I will conclude by saying, we're not stupid to think that change is going to come from the top down. Change is going to come from the bottom up. The more we understand that statement, and we understand that already we are in a situation whereby for the African masses, there is nowhere to go but to fight this classist, racist society that we have been put in, or situation to have our dignity reinstated, our being and livelihood reinstated. So I would like to say, as there are no questions, I want to say I appreciate everyone who's been on here and everyone who has appreciated the show and people who keep coming back for these shows. I appreciate it. I appreciate that we can create spaces and places where we choose to actually discuss our issues, learn about our struggle, and think of ways to push it forward. So sometimes I don't see it in the comment box, but I've seen some appreciation messages. But I want to say I appreciate y'all as well, because you've dedicated the time. So I'm going to go ahead and close today's show. But it is our job to make sure that we as the masses are organized. We cannot wait for the next politician to get the strategy for us or the mulamwa for us and be told to actually wait to be told the strategy, because we've been in that situation before. We still currently are in that situation. So in order to start avoiding things like that, we actually need to be organized and not begging and asking for accountability, but actually being the place whereby situations are addressed fast. So thank you so much for everyone who's been here. Until next Sunday, appreciate it. And also say again that the book I was reading from is called Class Struggle in Africa. It was written by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. That was a chapter on elitism. And please go ahead and get yourself online. There's a PDF. And if it's not accessible to y'all, I can go ahead and post a PDF in the Telegram group that we do run, so that it is accessed by all of you. A good evening, a good morning, a good afternoon, and thank you to everyone who's been here. Until next time.
Abalangira bantade mirembe Kezo mulangira suna tese akama walero Kano kama kabuliro yo kwenesiga akama kagamba munago mesigwa Kano kama kabuliro yo kwenesiga akama kagamba munago mesigwa Abaganda twandizukuka ng'obudde butugeddeko twandikuma lugo ebyaffe babitupako suuna waliwo abalyake bangi bentegeddeko begobanye empologoma bagikutteko ebyabulungi mwansi babivanako anti ekitambo ky'obunnanfuusi kyabatuulako ayaye omuntu mwa wansi gwe bazanyirako batulimba nti balina ke babala akaddako naye abagezigezi ng'omwana kimbugwe laivu yababuuka ekimanya nti batusibavako Keno revolution kuzukusa bongo bali batufera bali batufumba obongo befako boka beyagaliza na boka ebano bakalya boka bagisula beyambalira masuti basiba mu mpatenga bayiwa musimbi kye bali babala kali mali ansibye ennyonyi bazifula taxi kala mazima twabesiga twabawa obululu abaana bafa bangi basigwa amazima abalala bawangaluka ulira bali ku mawange yo bavuya naye mwate nakuzo mulya kenze no manyizi baana nalime wagonda wuya natera sigenda kugenda onyigiriza enyindo lindako ebinajja naye bwenfuna federo nawo nebinajja kano kama kabulira oyo gwenesiga kagamba munange omwesigwa kano kama kabulira oyo gwenesiga kagamba munange omwesigwa akama kabaka wafa twetaaga kwanga mujeiko olabe bulende bweya munange luno lwoya lwa nnyindo nkobasamboko waluganda yonna gyoli kikukwatako wamma abaana b'ebulaya namwe abaana bawakamba kamba njagala tufuuke ekitole tulwanire federo lyeko nange ndyeko ne kabaka waffe muwenda kyanonya wamma abaana b'engoma nesakamba alangira bambejja kakakamba mama abaana b'omusuka kakamba mwe mulimu ekyama omwava ekyama engonge enfumbe olugambe senene ab'ekinyoma ekyama mulindwa kyambabulira mwenna abaana b'engabi akamba mukagabane n'abo abaana b'ekkobe nenkimwedira namuŋŋoona oli wakasimba ab'eddira enkula n'ab'enswaswa ab'empologoma bafunye akama n'abo abaana b'enkubu bafunye akama abaana b'empeewo kakakama abakatimbuma kakakama ab'engona mu abaana b'ente akama komukabulira abo abaana b'ekibe ab'embwana mu ab'ekibe akama mukakasuka eri mu baana b'envuma abaana b'embamba akama mutima nenge waliwo akama endiga enjovu kakakama embuzi n'enjobe kakakama engerebwe n'engejje kakakama obutiko n'akasange kakama wamma bekebuka akama mukagabane n'abenjaza kuno mulanga basoga bakyoli bagisu banyero batolo banyakole ati akama munanga akama mwenna akama kembagamba federo tuve mu munino tukwatire wamu olutalo lw'okunoonya federo katonda yamba okumire kabaka wange tata katonda tasa okumire kabaka w'omutanda.
Oh, I want to say, so I was not able to see the text that you had sent earlier on with the question. If you can go ahead and then retype it, because I'm still here in the background, and then we can have at it and have a discussion around it. And I can show it on the screen as well. I'm sorry, this is a bit different format to work with since I do not have a studio number, or I'm not using the main studio, actually is the right way to say. I'm currently not using the main studio, but using a sublet one. So I'm not able to use all the facilities that come with the main studio, including the phone number. So I can use the chat box in order to address any questions that you might have. But the problem with the chat is sometimes I don't see some of the other messages that have been sent earlier on. So if you're still on, if you write it right now in the text box, I can go ahead and then show it, and then we can speak on it or talk about it. So if that is not possible as well, it can be something that you can actually, even this is another avenue, you can send it to, I can put in the chat box, I'll put my UNN email, and you can send it there, and I will correspond via email, because that too is a plausible solution. So do send it to that email, and then we will go over that. But as I said before, a good night, a good morning, a good afternoon to you all until next Sunday.